Getting fabrication projects done in a small workspace can be frustrating, but it is possible, and this cart has helped me stay productive, organized, and most importantly, build nicer projects. I love this cart, but I hate using it. Come along today as I fix some of the most annoying things that bother me every time I have to use it.
Dad, are you any good at this?
I don't know, maybe.
I build fabrication projects out of a 2-car garage. I've moved over the years, but it always seems like the area I'm working in is always a little smaller than ideal. Every year I try to collect even more tools, and the struggle to keep the shop from turning into a big mess is a challenge. I end up putting a lot of thought into what tools I keep around and how I set them up. To keep things even more challenging, I've made a commitment to my family to be able to keep 2 of the cars in the garage for the chilly Pennsylvania winters. I need my garage to be able to go from this to this in just a few minutes. To meet these goals, I made a cart that combines most of what I need for metal fabrication in one place. Before I show you the improvements this cart needs, let's go over what it currently has. It all started out with a 2-foot by 2-foot welding fixture table from Certiflat. You can buy these with legs, but at the time I was strapped for cash, so I used some scrap tubing I had at home and made 4 legs and put some cheap Harbor Freight casters on the bottom. I made the legs tall enough to put the top at a good standing work height. That alone was a big step up from welding hunched over on the garage floor. Next, I added a 2-foot by 3-foot side table on the right. I lowered the table so my chop saw sits flush with the fixture tabletop. This gave me room for a benchtop grinder as well as my 1-inch belt sander. I find that when I'm building anything from metal, these are my main tools, and I have them all in one space, ready to go, and it keeps projects moving quickly. Up next, I needed a solution for all the miscellaneous stuff you use when you're fabricating. Grinding discs, bolts, nuts, clamps, the list is kind of endless. I had this old metal organizer from my grandfather, and it was a perfect way to keep things organized and keep a nice reminder of him here in the shop with me every day. Finally, I added my great-grandfather's bench vise to the side of the table for that extra hand when holding workpieces. That covers the basics, so let's get into the 4 biggest issues I have with this cart, one at a time. This cart has been used and abused over the last 2 years. Let's get it disassembled and cleaned up. You can see here I use the top of the organizer to keep raw materials under 5 foot long. This works really well and keeps things from laying around on the floor. I try to keep a few things on the bottom rails, but they like to fall out when I'm moving the cart and then get stuck under the wheels. It's a real pain. I'm going to get this vise out of the way so I don't bump into it while I'm making the rest of the modifications. I also found that hanging my creeper on the back of the cart works pretty well for keeping it out of the way when I don't need it. One of the reasons for disassembling everything is that I never fully welded all the legs when I made this cart. In preparation for welding, I'm going to get everything sanded, cleaned, and knock some of the dirt off that has accumulated from the projects over the last 2 years. I'm using a random orbital sander with 120 grit paper to clean off the finish that box tubing comes from the store with. If you're doing something that you want to look really good, you'll definitely want to do more prep than this. I'm just trying to get the welds to stick and later protect it from rusting, so I'm not being too fussy with the prep. With everything cleaned up, we're ready to get into the real work. The first problem that has always been a pain when using this cart is that there's no lip around this outside edge of this half the table. Tools will slip off when I'm working on a project. I don't want to bolt the tools down so I can keep this workspace flexible. I'm using some 1/8 inch thick by 1 inch tall flat stock to make the raised edge all the way around. This should keep things where I want them. I'm cutting the steel with a metal cutting chop saw. These saws have carbide tipped teeth and spin slower than a normal chop saw. With the flat stock cut, I'm ready to put this lip on the edge of the cart. I used 2 bar clamps and a 3/4 inch block of wood to line up the parts before welding. I decided to put a short weld every 4 inches or so. There won't be any heavy loads on this lip, so I don't think fully welding it would be necessary. I'm using a Hobart Handler 210 MIG welder. I've had this unit for about 11 years now, I find it can weld most steels that I can afford or run into in any of my automotive, home, or farm projects. What's up, Anna? What do you need? Okay.
That could have helped us.
Wow, let's wait and see. I'm gonna do some welding. Can you guys jump outside? With a small amount of skill and mostly luck, the scrap stainless steel top fits just inside the lip on the first try. I was a little surprised. I was expecting to need to trim this some. I had my belt sander fall off this table last week. In fact, I think that's the motivation to get this lip added now. I don't think I need to worry about that anymore. I added 2 more welds to tie the vertical lip into the fixture table. This pretty much wraps up the first major improvement. Here's a look at the lip. Nothing too fancy. Let's move on to the next problem with this cart. In a small shop, I'm always fighting for space. This area down near the casters is wasted. I'm always tempted to stack stuff down here, but it ends up falling off when I'm moving the cart around. Today, I'm going to address that and finally put a shelf down here. There was a hardware store near me that went out of business recently. They were selling off some of the racks, and they had a great deal on these used metal grates. I picked one up to repurpose for this shelf. I'm just taking some measurements here to figure out how the bars should line up with the cart frame. After some thought, it worked out almost perfectly. Here in a second, I'm going to start chopping this up and do some test fitting. Over the years, I've found the angle grinder with an abrasive slitting disc is one of the most useful tools. You can make almost anything with these things, and they're cheap. If you're just getting into metal fabrication, it's probably one of the first tools you should buy. Just definitely wear your safety glasses. I've had grit in my eyes a few times over the years from working with these, but it's definitely a handy tool. I did a quick test fit to see how things were lining up. I knew it would not fit until I clearanced the areas where the table legs go through. That's what I'm doing here, just clearing the extra material away and seeing how it fits. You can see this is going to let me utilize this space much better. I'm not sure what I'll keep down here. In the past, I've stored my oil drain pan in a small toolbox. If you have any ideas for what would fit well here and be useful, let me know. I grabbed the MIG welder again and welded the ends of each wire to the tubes to tie everything together really well. Next, I finished welding some of those tubes that were only tacked from before. And I ran out of weld wire. The next thing I wanted to improve on this cart was to get it all painted up. A lot of times I get projects like this 95% of the way done and then never quite finish everything off. So it feels good to get this painted and actually be 100% done, or at least until I figure out something else I want to add or change. I'm using an oil-based implement paint. This particular one's from Tractor Supply. It's the first time I've used this brand, but it seems to lay down nice and it's not as runny as some of the other paints I've used recently. One tip, I have started using cheap paint brushes from Harbor Freight for this type of quick painting project. I hate cleaning up brushes, and for something like this where I can get away with a lower quality brush, it makes sense for me. This kind of painting is definitely tedious and takes forever. With all the tubes and wire grates, it seemed like I was never going to get done. In the end, it turned out decent, and will keep this cart looking respectable for a long time. All that's left is to put it together and see how it works. Maybe I'll find out if we need to redo anything or make any changes. If you have any ideas on how I can make this cart better, let me know in the comments. If you're thinking about making something like this for your garage, don't feel like you need to copy me exactly. All the materials I used were scrap or stuff I got off Marketplace. So make the best of what you have and tune it for the type of work that you're doing. Most importantly, try to keep it mobile and just get out there and build something. If you want to see more of my projects, click the link to the electric mini Jeep I made for my kids.